Okay, we are now recording. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Thursday night Food Sovereignty Task Force meeting, December 17th. And we're going to start off tonight by a little ceremony of breaking bread. I've got my crackers here. And so Callan, this was your idea. So would you like to start us off with some positive vibes and some good words? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you both for being here and connecting in the ways that we can. I would like to just say thank you to Mother Earth for providing nutrition and connection and energy to us and to all living beings. And we are all interconnected. And I'm super excited to work together with both of you. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, raising our crackers and so this is a task force. We don't have a necessary quorum or anything like that. We were recording for those who can't make it, for posterity, and for us to remember what we were trying to do from last week in our busy lives. So the agenda for tonight, with an hour-long meeting, is pretty simple, and at this point, it's basically to kind of start looking at our 2021 goals and to discuss our main event, which we've been talking about so far, and that's how we want to impact on Earth Day. If we have time, there are plenty of other things to talk about, but I think if we get through these things, that'll be enough. Are there any other items that you gentlemen would like to have on the agenda for tonight's discussion?
Well, this is the first time Joe and I have had I mean, you're here, but I've actually never even talked to Joe. I've talked to Jerica once alone and tried to get a better idea of, her values systems and what she's doing and what she's planning on doing. I kind of want to resolve the issue between with Jerica and you, Robert. I don't understand it yet. And
yeah, it's off. It's kind of weird to me.
Yeah, and Joe, I don't know, how long have you known Robert and how long have you known Jerica?
I've just met them both earlier this year? Yeah. Gosh.
As we discussed earlier, that is a discussion that we're working on. But for the time we have tonight, and for the recording, I'd like to try to focus on the positive agenda that we have tonight. Do you want to add that to the agenda for the discussion? Because I feel like if we're going to have the discussion, we should make a special effort to make sure that Jerica's here, so all the parties are represented and everybody and we can resolve this, which is the goal.
You're totally right, and I just want us all to work together because we all have, it sounds like we have the exact same values and goals. So I just want to get to the crux of the issue so we can gather as friends and continue to work together.
Sure. Well, I'm sure we'll get there. So again, are there any agenda items that you'd like to add for our discussion tonight, gentlemen?
So if I remember last time we were talking about like a YouTube advertising, because our goal really, this is for the Food Sovereignty Council type stuff. So if it was like education, so where's your food grown, get people to get more interested in their where their foods comes from.
Mm-hmm.
To probably somehow provide some. I was thinking those YouTube shows got something, but have like a channel that has a rotating schedule of like local shows too, and then because Alaska Food Sovereignty Council could be sponsoring this page or something, this platform for these Alaskan creators to get their spot looked at, and then have and able to plug their page or whatever, like Alaskan comedians or artists, or because I watch the stuff my kids watch, and like the Odd One Is Out stuff. Like there's great local animators and artists who could probably even add to what we're trying to do too, with even some of these education things that we're trying to push for. That was one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I went on a tangent.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into what we're talking about for our planning for 2021 and the events coming up. And the big thing we talked about was Earth Day. So so I'd like to go ahead and and move forward with the discussion of our 2021 goals, one of the things that we've all agreed on, that we can agree on, is that the 80% in 10 years is a worthwhile goal. And even though it's ambitious, even though we're not quite sure how we're going to get there, how we're going to measure it, we know that if we're anywhere close to that in 10 years, we're all going to be in a far better position. And so I created a little breakdown. I'm not going to try to bother with the tech on screenshotting things, but if we can achieve 5% in 2021, that's going to be a huge goal. Not the percentage goal may not be that large, but I think if we can achieve that, that means that a lot more people are looking at our food systems in Alaska and in other states where we hope them to be able to encourage and inspire them to do the same thing as well, and figuring out their own food sovereignty goals. But basically, I was looking at maybe 5% for the first year, 5% increments for the first 4 years, and then jumping that up to 10%. Because if we do that, we're able to meet our 80% goal by 2030. Now that may change, that may alter, but I think that's at least a starting point for having clarity on the fact that we want 80%, and this is the first part of how we get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good metric to start with?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, the next thing is basically, Callan and I were talking about this a little bit before, is that the three of us are all very passionate advocates. We're not going to get a whole lot done with creating 5% or 80%, just the three of us. Jerica, Crystal, Will, there's lots of other people out there that are interested in food, that are focused on food, and we need to find this balance between the people who grow it and the people who eat it, and the people who are in between, and then the people who handle the waste to get it back into the people who grow it. But those are the idea there is, we had discussed one of the ways to organize the people is in inviting them in to these meetings with the idea of creating task force and different ideas. And that's why we want to have clear objections and timelines with like Earth Day. And one of the things that we were looking to start off with was a State of the Food Union. Basically a presentation on where are we at, what are our difference or what are our challenges, and basically use that as a launch pad for why we need to have such an aggressive goal, and then how that's going to look, and start structuring that out. And the Zoom feature that we have as our nonprofit does allow us to have little breakout rooms. So in an event like that, we could actually go several hours and then have little breakout rooms where different groups can get and talk about. And for the two of you, basically you're on the different ends of the spectrum as far as my thinking goes, because Callan, you're with the foraging, that's my CLM network, grassroots stuff, where Joe is vertical farming, aerospace, he's growing, just like the stuff behind me, so and in the middle, we have, people like Crystal and Jerica and a lot of other good people out there that are farming their butts off to try to feed people and using traditional agricultural methods. And a combination of all three of those is going to be needed to meet that goal. And I've expressed this before to folks that I've adopted a Three Sisters philosophy, or a Cubist philosophy, on how to achieve this stuff. So Callan, are you familiar with the Three Sisters philosophy in farming?
No.
It's an indigenous knowledge-based idea of using beans, corn, and peas to grow in sympathy, so that they actually work together in the soil and in the air to create pests. It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship.
I've heard of that. I'll be right back. I just gotta take this out of the oven.
Okay, and so that's what we've been, framing at. And the Cubist approach is kind of the same thing, but it's from the Renaissance area of art, where people look at the same thing from three different perspectives and have three different valid points. So, Joe, do you understand that perspective? Do you think it's valid in trying to get to the actuality of projects and the solutions?
That method of growing?
Well, it's not a method of growing. It's a method of thinking on how to look at a situation from different ways and look for the sympathies and look for how things can work together rather than seeing things as as projects and people as monoculture.
Oh, yeah, I can see something like that. I mean, it makes sense, but you have to be able to build the right bridges with proper partnerships, and then get the right people to maintain those lasting partnerships.
So you're saying, foraging, traditional farming, and then hydroponics with it. So that I think that is a good foundational structure for us to like look at. And then within each one of those is a bunch of different nuances. And where my brain is going and realizing is that all the research is already there. We just need to actually absorb that and communicate it to everybody in the group, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and like get grant funding to do research, which would take 10 years, like on how to, like, literally everything is already there. We just need to tap into the resources. So we need to, it seems like we need to actually just assign people to do research and write reports on whatever it is that we need, that we see as like a foundational part of each one of those three. So like, for example, foraging. Obviously, foraging is a limited resource, and you have to be careful not to disturb the environment. But there's a balance of like food forests where you're encouraging natural systems and encouraging the proliferation of organisms that are already there. So what I would be interested in doing, is a berry farm where you go to a berry patch and you encourage those blueberries in a number of ways, and all that. There's multiple reports on how to do this, and you can create a farm on an acre of land that's worth $100,000 in blueberries in just a few years if you do this. And you can do it with cranberries, you can do it with cloudberries, which are extremely high in protein and a really good food source. Then on top of that, then you get into like inoculating logs with mushrooms. Like you don't even have to like pick the mushrooms that are going naturally. You just bring resources into the forest, or into like for lion's mane, for example, you'd want to take it to like the type of forest the lion's mane likes to grow, lay down the logs. You probably wouldn't even have to inoculate the logs, but you could do that. And then those logs will be producing a massive amount of protein and food for the next 10 years. And it's like very low labor, and a really rich food source. So like how to turn that into a report and then turn that into a curriculum and then teach that curriculum. Okay, then we need to talk about
that process is the curriculum. You were talking earlier about the difference between I think we were talking about the different types of economics, the linear economics and the platform economics. And platform economics in a situation like this is experiential learning, is project-based learning. So when I was in Oregon, one of the things that I love to do in forming the acts of random kindness is that every year we would go out and randomly pull together volunteers of people who don't normally volunteer and get local businesses to sponsor us with supplies. And we would go to a local school. And my favorite was we went to a school and we painted a hopscotch pattern of where they had just converted a drainage ditch into a mini wetland. So the kids helped us pick out the plants that we put in the design. And so while they were playing, they were actually learning the scientific names of these plants that they could see in the wetland. So what you're talking about with setting up a food forest, that could be the curriculum. You have one generation that goes out there and, lays the food forest out. We have people that donate some land, and then it becomes a living classroom. Every summer and every winter, they're out there, they're tapping birch bark, they're growing mycelium and stuff like this. And these can all be plots that are around neighborhoods, and they can be, community based to have that protection. People aren't going to be messing with it if there are actually people out there hiking.
The land trust.
What's that?
The Interior Alaska Land Trust.
That's a very possible partner. But
yeah.
It's also connecting with it's also connecting with these Waldorf schools, which will have the more flexible curriculum ability. And then once we have something established with them, we can, extend that into, Kramer's Field would be a perfect food laboratory. With all those trails back there, it'd be perfect for us to see different crops and stuff like that people could eat and still maintain the natural balance and make it more of a living laboratory, but use that as because that's basically in the middle of town. and then we can, help people. I've got some land here that I'm happy to do some of that kind of stuff on as part of our school. But you're right. What you're talking about is the work of a whole task force. Like, you need to have a task force that's just focused on how we meet that, what percentage of that 80% is going to come from foraging. And then Joe needs to figure out what percentage that's going to come from vertical farming. And then we need to, or advanced agriculture. And then, then the traditional agricultural folks can, meet in the middle. And essentially, I see where in the future, especially with the variety of crops we want to have, that vertical farming is going to be like 40 to 50% of where we get our 80%. And then traditional agriculture is going to be somewhere within like 30 to 35%. And that foraging that you're doing is probably going to be someplace closer to 3 to 5% of people's annual diets. Anything more than that, like you said, is going to overtax the ecosystem, until the point where we can turn what we cultivate in Alaska into a sustainable systems. But how does that sound?
Yeah, those numbers might be pretty close. The thing is that, you theoretically wouldn't be foraging. You'd be turning a small piece of land into a hyper-productive natural system. Like, it's still got the endogenous species and crops, but you just be encouraging those particular ones. And I guess that it kind of blurs the line, right, between foraging and traditional or normal agriculture. But yeah, so then, like, the other thing that needs to be talked about is energy. So Joe, you're starting hydroponics, and I have dreamed of having a hot springs to grow food at, because you wouldn't have to fuck around with heat, and then you wouldn't have to fuck around with electricity, and you would be growing at cost, whatever, or with no cost, whatever you want, essentially. And like, I want to see mangoes in Alaska. Like, that's always been my goal, and I'm happy, and it's perfectly in line. What?
I'm gonna take note of that, because I'll tell you, I don't mean to cut you off, but part of one of my goals, as my company's drive fast, is the science and technologies part, where we because the technology's out there, everything that's out there that we can use to associate with growing indoors. We don't have to stick particularly to one. We can collect it all. There's all this data out there that's available already on it, and then we can do stuff like grow mangoes indoors. That's my goal. That's to grow pineapples indoors too. To grow.
Yeah, but Joe,
apples and oranges.
Where are you getting electricity in your heat?
Well, eventually. So the goal because the costs of each facility, no matter what's going to be roughly around a quarter, just in electricity. So to self-invest into moving over to self-sustaining systems is one of the main priorities of where the profit margin would go, but also because that's how I would want to deal with address the cost issues. Sorry, that's the main question, right? I didn't mean to go off on tangents.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, it is.
But when it comes to, so, and then the water, because water up here is relatively cheap. So I was looking at freight farm facility, like micro facilities, because the idea is to have micro facilities within macro facilities. And within each one of these, you can grow multiple things through a multitude of different ways. So you can have a piece cordoned off for specifically this and these types of facilities, and another using maybe some sort of soil-based system that has like direct to root feeding. And you can do mushrooms indoors. You can create entire systems based around just growing food and maintaining like even your own beehivery. So that's like my entire goal, but I just need to start with one little piece.
Yeah.
And so and then it comes down to like self-distribution. But like the electricity, when it comes to facilities, self-investing into long-term sustainable, that's even the motto of the company, is growing into the futures through sustainability over profitability. Sorry, didn't mean to take control there.
No, that was good. Thank you. I haven't talked to you enough about your vision and your company, so that was good to know.
Well, do you
And
guys have contact information?
what?
Do you have each other's contact information? If not, I'll make sure you guys are connected.
We're friends
Well,
on
we're friends
Facebook.
on Facebook right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been to want to talk to you too because I like what you got going on in your particular what is it, my mycological knowledge, I could say.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to food, because especially for people looking for meat substitutes, because the idea is when you, again, growing food is a major economy builder, simply because when you take the food that's grown in the community and again from invest with the profits of that back into that community, you can drive business, simply because people will want to start their restaurants. They're going to need their fresh ingredients, and you will have these ingredients ready for them. And then those can be even, I had another, especially with meat substitutes with mushrooms. A lot of people prefer those too.
Yeah. 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 And there's so many venues to go down. I'm just trying to figure out like how we organize. How do we
Well,
organize and
This,
do it
this
in a
is
way
how we
that
organize. This
it
is how
does
we organize
provide
right here.
jobs?
So if we can go to I don't have the calendar in front of me, but if the next Thursday meeting, like I said, we can have an open call. So since we're not going to get a chance to meet and likely chance to meet again before the new year, I was looking at having a, like I said, working on this State of the Food Union for Sunday, January 3rd. And then the Thursday after that, we go back to our regular meetings. And then I was going to ask what you guys think about having that next Thursday meeting, an open, basically an open call meeting, and to find out who wants to join. My LinkedIn, or excuse me, my Zoom account allows me to have up to 100 people on a call at one time. And while that's more than we actually can manage, it'll be good. It would be good to find out who's really interested, because then we can divide them up into, where their most interest is, and start putting together, mycology task force and advanced agricultural task force. And then we could put together an Earth Day task force. And that was the idea of organizing for 2021, is basically how we get more people on here. And I recommend that the next step we take is just to focus on doing something on the 3rd, an event around food, which also gives us, with this group, we also have the opportunity, which I tested last night in another venue, of having watch parties. There are a great number of food related movies and videos that we could watch and use those as discussion points for conversations about what we do. And then if we leave each one of those events with a call to action, then we're advocates and we're organized.
Sounds good.
Okay. So the other part of that is related to Earth Day. And one of the things that I've been trying to toy around with in regards to fundraising and awareness raising and engaging is that here in the interior, for many years, we've had something called the Great Alaskan Food Stock. And it's been a local group that's gotten together with restaurant businesses and stuff like that. And out in Fox,
The Great Alaska what?
The Great Alaska Food Stock.
Food stock. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I understand that they weren't planning on doing it anymore. And it's been raining the last 3 years we've been out there, so it's been just it's one of those things in transition. But the idea is basically just like Farm Aid, using, and I've been toying around this idea of the Jerry Lewis telethon for food. So basically, Zoom allows us to actually have 24 hours. So we were thinking about all kinds of things that we could do in 24 hours with variety shows and stuff like that, just to drive funding into the education and job training of the food industry in Alaska, to bolster that up, and to get more people thinking about why we need more local production as kind of a way to market that industry. But it's kind of boiled down to this idea of what we're looking at doing is on the Equinox, having a concert that's both virtual and local. And what's gotten boiled down to is, like right now, we start at 10 o'clock in the morning with a concert in Kotzebue. of native music and stuff like that, and that goes for 2 hours. And obviously, the people in Contribute can attend. And then at 12, it switches over to Fairbanks, and then at 2, it switches over to Wasilla, and then at 4, it switches over to Anchorage, and then at 6, it switches over to Kenai, and then at 8, it can switch down. It can switch over to Haines, and those 2-hour blocks can basically follow. Basically follow the state across, and each community engaging each community in their own food sovereignty movement. What do you guys think about that?
Excellent. I love it. It's a good idea. I'll play guitar and talk about stuff.
Well, these are things that we can talk about. We can advertise and start getting people interested in signing up for local talent and stuff like this, as well as, and this is where our 501c3 comes in, is we can also solicit with the organization businesses, not necessarily for money when we can get it, but also for swag. Help, get some of these companies to get us stuff that we can use to engage people, and door prizes and other ways to keep them engaged rather than just entertain them. Another thing that we had talked about was doing an annual calendar, a food calendar, basically just getting people the idea of food as a real thing and local farmers as real people. And so if we could get 12 pictures together of good, high quality pictures and a theme, we basically could, have those calendars as fundraisers. They're, I think, like $11 to make on print or on, I forget one of the software, the printing services. I forget what the name of it is. It's escaping me at the moment. But the idea is that we can sell those for $20 a piece and raise money. And again, it's a way to engage people. And this year, with the theme being the dawn of the age of Aquarius, it would be a good time to show people who are, working on permaculture farms, showing small farms and stuff like that throughout Alaska. And the idea is, if we focus on getting everything ready for April 20th, then we can have calendars that run from May to May. And then every year at Earth Day, we can issue new calendars instead of going through December to December, where we would be competing with a lot of other calendar invites.
You gotta do it at starting out the new year, I think.
What's that?
I'll do a calendar in May or March, sorry.
It's just a thought.
Yeah, it's a good idea, except that part.
Well, it doesn't have to. We could start the calendars in January, but we could make them for the next year.
I was thinking, yeah, it's too bad that the timing is the new year right now, because it's a little late. People probably already have their calendars. But yeah, if we start now, get them by the summertime. And I know like 2 or 3 places here in Fairbanks that would happily stock a calendar like that and wholesale buy them. Yeah,
well, people people have a lot of calendars are made around the new year, and made for Christmas,
do for
like that.
Over the year. Maybe we get our pictures and then we have it set up for the next year. We could get them ready and printed and set them up for 2022 if we want to do something like that.
Or if we don't want to do, one of the things we can do to set it out and to actually drive our first one is, instead of doing an Age of Aquarius kind of hippie thing where farming, we could do farming is sexy. We could do a farmer's calendar for men and women, and and push that to get people to buy the calendars.
That is also a really good idea.
That is cool. Really cool artistic photographs too, or the art of the farmers, even, because a lot of Alaskans who do stuff like farming or Alaskan work are artists too. I can name 15 people almost off the top of my head from here that are artists in music or painting, but like painting and drawing and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that's where the idea of a theme can come in, is we can do art of farming, farming is sexy, and what we should be doing is posting these ideas, and next week talking back. I think some of these also have the opportunity to do polls and stuff, and so we can try to poll these kind of queries on what people would like to see. But the idea is to have basically not just building a brand, but building that exposure to get people comfortable with, this is where to go to when this is what's going on, this is what's happening. And as we get dialed in, because we also have solstice and golden days, and for Rondi, I mean, who's going to be working on the Corpiconia floats for the parades this year? We haven't talked about that. But the last thing on the well, actually it's not the last thing, but the next thing to talk about, it's about 10 minutes till, is that we talked about last night, Callan and I've talked about with Joe and some other folks, the idea of expanding this beyond just the food production folks. One of the things when Jerica was talking, it was the connection she had with farmers, and the connections we had with farmers, and the connection she had with farmers, and that's awesome. But there's also there's restaurant owners, there's uh, those food truck vendors. There's a lot of people that use these products, and there are customers if we want to be growing food, and they could also be our suppliers. Using that example, using the mango as an example, there are only so many people in the state that are going to want fresh mangoes. So we need to be able to have a way to not only preserve mangoes for when people want them, but we also need to be able to make mango marmalade and mango sauce for barbecue, and those kind of value added products, which the value of those is they use ugly fruit. They don't necessarily need the best, prettiest fruit, because it all gets ground up into sauces and stuff. But those kind of market developments are all part of what we need to be focusing on as a goal. You're muted, Callan.
For sure, but what you're talking about is essentially now a business. Now you're talking about like a different structure, which I think is good, and that's where I would love it if in some way we can include the conversation about co-ops, just talking about like how you can start these up as an organization where the people working on these value-added products own the company. And like if we're just setting up co-ops like for individuals to join, like it doesn't have to be that complicated. And
So
the people that are, like obviously, because all I'm saying is like, okay, what we're doing right now is we're talking about doing all these projects to build up the brand of 80% in 10 years, right? And then just educate people about the food system. That's the goal here, correct? And that's more of a nonprofit goal. But obviously, yeah, we could also be doing advocating for economical systems that will actually provide jobs and give economic.
That's going to get done, but that's beyond the scope of what we're trying to accomplish right now. And that is part of the reason I do understand where Jerica had some concerns about the crossover, about where our advocacy work stops being basically commercial for the businesses that exist and start competing with the businesses that exist. And that's not what we want to do. So Joe, you had something you wanted to add?
So okay, what's that three plant symbiotic method you were talking about?
The Three Sisters approach, where
Yeah,
beans, corn, and rice, or beans, corn, and squash work together to create symbiosis.
Yeah. So, in the sense of what we're trying to accomplish, we're trying to create that symbiosis, but between like the farmers, business, and the foragers kind of thing here. This is what I'm getting at, right?
Between that there's a symbiosis between the foragers, the traditional farmers, and the advanced farmers, and then there's a symbiosis between the producers, the farmers, and the producers, the consumers, and the value chain providers, restaurants, grocery stores, those kind of producers. So there's
that all falls under business aspect, in my opinion. And that's where, like, to me, it's the symbiosis is there, but it's all business. And so what it comes down to is that, like, a person like me who's a self-industrialist, who I believe in the value of. My success comes with the success of the people around me and the communities around me and communities around my business. So what that would include is that means that the success of the business has to invest into the farmer regardless, with nothing asked in return, because the farmer, especially like this whole connecting with farmers, if you will, that you're talking about, um, it that's where it comes from. If you want to connect with farmers, help farmers do their thing, help them get development without them having to be so heavily burdened by the cost of actually farming, because there's a very high cost for farming your land, especially when you can only farm it for such a X amount of period of time.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, the foraging, you can help do that, promote that through community, like setting up little community spots for sure. Be like, look, check this area out. We got set this spot up for, like, check around parks. We can go around parks and be like, check this out. We found this mushroom. We don't advise whatever safety precaution insert about eating wild mushrooms in town and stuff that you pay. But, this like foraging basics.
Yeah, or even, instead of tearing out your yard or tearing out your woods to put in a yard, maybe you build a little food forest around your house, and you go out every morning and you forage a little bit just to kind of be connected to nature. You don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be someplace away from the house. You can do you can do things. You can go out and tap a birch tree in your own yard. So those kind of things, you can keep it all close to home. One of the things that you guys mentioned or you were talking about earlier was energy. And then you were talking about co-ops, and we were talking about co-ops earlier. And one of the challenges I found with co-ops is that in order for a co-op to truly function, all of the members have to be equally engaged. They have to be equally educated, and they have to be willing to put in the time and energy. So it's been a challenge finding the people that are willing to have that level of engagement. It's not just showing up once a year to vote, or it's not just saying you're part of something and donating. You need to be part of that decision-making process. And in order to make good decisions, you have to be willing to educate yourself, and not necessarily everybody has the time or is willing to educate themselves to make good decisions. And so then that starts becoming politics, where you have the people that know the stuff telling the people that don't know the stuff, who are more inclined to listen to authorities, kind of just going along with things. And so that's why I was talking to you about the Green Bay Packers model, where you have, the majority of people are voting to have a dedicated board of directors, and that board of directors is dedicated to making sure all the resources and the profits and the control stay locally. That way you can have relationships with big corporations, but not to the point where they can monopolize your time or your town. Too many towns and cities were built around these big corporations, and when the corporation shut down, so did the town. And we've got to move away from that. And that's what we've been.
I have not.
That's why I believe food, you can create an insulated economy or just around food alone.
That's what we were talking about with the platform economy, and that's why I've been talking with Joe about the Marco Polo competition is actually designing cities around the food systems that are needed to feed the population. But go ahead, Captain.
I was just going to say that I haven't yet read the bylaws that you had said describing the Green Bay Packers. It sounds like the type of co-op that I'm interested in, because it's a super broad term. Like, there's a lot of different type of co-ops, consumer co-ops, and then there's co-ops that aren't even co-ops, and then there's worker co-ops, which is, like you said, where everybody has equal, or maybe on different pay scales and different levels of responsibility. Everybody still has one vote, but they vote for the board of directors. And then, depending on the way that the bylaws can be set up, it still leaves some room for investors to put their money in, speed things up, and maybe someday have like a distribution. But ultimately, it's not going to be at this level where you have everybody working for shareholders, no matter what, people who aren't doing any of the work and just want to extract as much money out of everybody's value. So that's where, like, now when we're talking about these systems, these big ideas, we're talking about like agriculture, and then you guys are talking about cities and stuff. And then what we're trying to do here is education.
Yeah,
But
that's
what
the
I'm
first
saying
thing.
is that eventually, we're going to break off into the realm of business.
Mhm.
It's no longer going to be just like, let's educate people. We're going to be talking about starting companies and managing people and managing resources. And that's why I really want to keep the cooperative. And I'm just now starting to I've been talking about co-op. I'm running the co-op for 3 years, the Chaga co-op here in Fairbanks. And I'm just now actually starting to read cooperative law and actually engage with these organizations that are dedicated to educating people on how to actually have democracy in a system, in a working system. And it's really beautiful. And like what we were doing was we were just saying, okay, here was a problem. All these foragers are getting ripped off. People, they're doing the majority of the work, but then they're selling to somebody who then is selling to somebody for twice as much and making way much more money for doing not as much work. Why is that? Because they knew who to sell it to. So if we share the processing efforts and we share the distribution networks, we're not hiding anything from each other. We can all come together. The harvester gets the majority of the profit. The little bit that the co-op keeps is to pay for business insurance, the website, resources for the foragers,
Oh, and
taxes.
helping people find legal discourse, even if they're in the
Yeah,
situation.
there's that, but you can set up a co-op for anything. But what I'm getting at was that we weren't actually a co-op because legally it was only 3 people to own the LLC.
Mhm.
Legally, co-op will actually be owned by everybody that's engaged in the system. But there can be different share levels of shares. Whereas okay, for me, what we're thinking about doing is there's 3 people that started the co-op. We get a capital share, 1 capital share each, and then we're going to be, theoretically, if it ever gets to a point to become profitable, we will get 1% or something. But the majority of the profit will always still go back to the workers to incentivize them to actually feel like they're investing in something that's not just raping them. So I really want to drive that home. Is that like I said, I am not yet at the point where I could perfectly articulate this. Obviously, it's a super complex system that we're trying to build here, or a co-op would be. But I think it's possible. And like you said, education, yeah, it's super hard. Everybody has to be on the same page, and that can be difficult. But I think that's where the art form of the bylaws and how you structure the bylaws can just make it run on its own.
Okay. So Joe, do you want to chime in?
For the most, yeah, I agree with Callan, 150%, dude.
All right. Well, one of the beautiful things about Alaska, and especially this, I don't like to use the word colony idea, but this idea is that Alaska is so dispersed that each community can actually test a different model for a full year or even 5 years and see how it works, evaluate it. And that's one of the beauties of our land, sea, and aerospace university is that these colony research projects could actually be, there's true value and true profit to have from just the experiments, just researching what works and what doesn't. I mean, we could set up in one village just one type of co-op for food. We could set up in another village another type of co-op for food and just test which one works better in the same conditions. That's one of the benefits of these remote communities to aerospace is that when you think about colonies on Titan, or you think about these long-term, these civilization founding moves, the first thing you have to deal with is how do people interact with each other in small populations over generations of isolation? Where would those situations naturally occur? That's exactly what we're trying to do in preserving the language and the culture of the indigenous people of Alaska, is maintaining that continuity of culture. And that gives us a lot of insights on how we might, how a population might react on a generation ship.
To go back to the idea, so we want to educate people still, so we're going to start there. And I was thinking of, we could have little PSAs that just show people how to, and then have an indoor vertical system or an indoor grow system made out of those PVC pipe systems and stuff. A lot of those can be maintained in your apartment, so we could sit there and have educational videos on how to make those, or how to grow your own herbs through something like that on an even smaller scale, through different other methods. You could show people it's just about managing the proper system. It'd be a very easy, like, here's a 1-2 snap together system for you to grow your own stuff, and make it even like one of those little minute and a half super cut videos on you see on your Facebook ad, and it'll be like right there.
Yeah, and just like I was talking with Callan a little while ago about turning the food forest idea into a living classroom. You and I have talked about how we might be able to, integrate. And I've talked to some others about how the homeschooling program actually pays for some of your school stuff. So pay for a shelf and some lights and some trays for growing microgreens and getting your kids engaged in the process of growing their own food. And that's part of the videos that we could be posting and the content that we could be putting up on our page. And that's one of the ways to keep engaging people too. It's after 7 o'clock now. There is a window for Thursday on the 31st, but I would be more inclined to this open meeting to push and advertise an open meeting for the 7th of January. How does that sound?
Sounds good. And
Yeah.
who do I tell people where is meeting? ARC? Or the
I'll post it on the food sovereignty page, food sovereignty in Alaska page. But like I said, we do not have right now. This is the best way to go forward until things get squared away. So yeah, it'll be an ARC food sovereignty task force meeting, but it'll be open to anyone who's interested in food sovereignty and the goals that we've set forth.
Cool. Sounds
and then
good.
it'll be a Zoom meeting like this one is. And then I just wanted to touch base on something you mentioned earlier, Callan, about the energy for these buildings. Originally, ARC was looking at the Polaris Hotel here in Fairbanks, the Northern Light Hotel in Anchorage, and the Igloo and outside of Cantwell. And the idea is that I have a friend right up the road here. He's got a geothermal system. He's got a loop that's 8 feet down the ground, and he has excess heat. So in Vegas, most of those buildings are pretty much, those high-rise buildings are pretty much self-contained. So you can use a combination of the geothermal heat in the ground, the energy created from the bio waste that's processed from the agricultural growing process, and then you can also use the solar and wind integrated into the building designs to be able to meet 100% of the building's energy needs on site, which is what they call net zero. There's one of the more interesting ways to do that is that I've seen where they have mixed use development. And so in each of these buildings, we could have a nightclub, and we could arrange it so that the floor was on kinetic pelts. And so basically, as people are dancing, they're generating electricity for the building and celebrating food. So those are some of the kind of innovations that we can use to basically meet the needs of the building, or like even in these vertical farms, people walking across the floor can generate electricity. So these buildings can be self-contained and completely isolated. And we were looking at basically the location of the Igloo as a perfect place to grow bananas and nuts and mangoes and stuff like that, because it'd be the easiest point to get those between Anchorage and Fairbanks. And then from there out to all the villages.
Cool.
Not that I've given this much thought or anything, but
I hear you, and I'm super into that. I love the idea of utilizing all the resources that are there. If there's already heat being generated, if it can be captured, that's much better than just trying to capture it from an external source like the wind or the sun. And I would love to, if you have any resources specifically on the trash. I don't understand yet how to turn trash into fuel or what. I haven't looked into it at all, actually. So if there's anything in particular that jumps out to you.
The term you want to YouTube is fractal distillation. I'll send you some videos, but there are definitely ways to not only turn plastic and other wastes into fuel, but as we've been talking about, and this is part of what we're doing with the Marco Polo competition, is that a lot of this stuff can literally be built from trash by grinding that trash up, mixing it with polymers, and then printing it out in 3D fashion. And you can print 2-story, 12-story buildings with 3D printers. You can modify a crane to print a 12-story building. That's another innovation that we're adding.
I need to see it tested under like severe earthquake conditions, getting hit by the tsunami. Like I need to see the videos of that, like to those tests of that polymer or that material getting hit with something heavy.
Yeah. Who
Yeah.
knows?
The
All right,
shape
good
of those, the
insights.
shape of this. Like I would just need before I trust it. I just need to see it stressed.
Sure. All right, gentlemen, well, that's an interesting and positive note to end our meeting on tonight. Is there anything else that you guys feel we need to cover, or you guys want to say in closing? Callan.
I feel good about this. It is like usually the underlying theme is always like, oh my God, I need to read more. And that's what I'll be doing in the meantime until we meet next time. I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And
All
I
right.
can't wait to talk to you more, Joe, too.
Okay. So, Joe, is there anything you'd like to end on?
No, thank you for inviting me again. You know, sorry for being late.
Not a
I
problem.
appreciate the meeting and definitely Callan will have to connect. Definitely want. I got a lot to say, and I'm just really excited. So thank you again,
Great.
and thank you again, Robert.
Okay. Well, for everybody watching, thank you for joining us tonight. And looks like our next meeting will be on January 7th at 6 p.m. Alaskan time. And so until then, be good to each other and remember that food is the common denominator of all human civilization. So we are all in this together. Be good to each other. Have a good night.
Nice, Robert. Post this on the Facebook page.
I will. Thank you.